Make everybody scurry. Good afternoon and welcome to the May 23rd meeting. June 23rd? July 23rd. I know I'd get it right. I'm stalling. I'm waiting for the preacher. But he doesn't look like he's coming. Maybe he's late. I can pray. I've done it before. Okay. Jason does a wonderful job. Jason, would you do us a favor and give us an invocation for our meeting, please? If you'll stand, Jason Whitaker, our IT director, will give the invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for a beautiful day. We thank you for the rain. We thank you for this chance to come and meet together and discuss the business of the community. We pray for your guidance and wisdom. Be with the council as they discuss and make decisions today. We thank you for all you do for us. In your name we pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Brother Jason. Jason has done double duty today. We planted a tree in memory of one of his staff members who passed away recently. We planted a tree in memory of Barbara Thompson right out here so she can see when everybody comes in late in the morning, is what Jason said. But she was a dear, dear employee. She used to sit back there and give me a high sign when somebody wasn't speaking into their mic, and we all loved her, and we will miss her. God bless her. Amen. Yep. Okay, next we have reports, first from our manager.
All right, I just have a couple of things. The first was I was going to thank Jason for that nice job this morning with Barbara's tree dedication, so thank you for that. The other comment I'd like to make is that last week we held one of our periodic Moore County Managers meetings, and the guest speaker was Phil Wirtz from the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and what he discussed with us was a potential plan by the CVB to approach the county commissioners and ask them to consider increasing occupancy taxes from 3% to 6%, with the notion of having some or all of that additional 3% available for, I think, what he characterized as business development investment, which I think is worth certainly considering. Among the managers in the room, I think the consensus was that we would like to have the opportunity to our municipalities would like to have the opportunity to simultaneously enter into this dialogue and potentially recommend that the commissioners consider allocating a portion of that additional 3% to the affected municipalities, much like it's done across the state and in various other counties. So we wound up with having a follow-up discussion about that at today's Tri-Cities meeting. But I just want to kind of set the stage on that. I think there's going to be a lot of follow-on discussion about that in the future.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Kevin.
No, I just I attended the Tri-Cities meeting today, and it's I think that with the election season, I think one of the things I wanted to say is that how important this partnership is with other cities, and whoever gets elected in any municipality, let's support this effort of working together with our neighboring cities. I'll use my time for that.
Well said, Kevin. Mr. Bouldry.
Just to echo a little bit of what Kevin said, for me, thinking about growth over 4 years, growth is, for me, is actually three factors of growth. There's growth, and as we would want to do some planning in the historic area of the village. I think there's growth when we think about the entire village. I think growing importance is growth in the southern Moore County and what our neighboring jurisdictions do that they do to benefit their respective municipalities, but at the same time causes an impact on us in Pinehurst. I guess I'll go keep harping on the Blake complex and the problems and the challenges we have for residents, particularly in the lake area, coming out to NC5. I can only imagine that this is going to just accentuate or exasperate drivers and traffic along 5. And the last part of this that I've mentioned before is for probably good reasons, and the state, and this goes back to the state, that the road infrastructure development takes so long and it is pressed out so far in the future that it's way out in front of what developers are doing, and so the developers, I think, are in front of us, and so going back to the original idea of the Tri-Cities, I think it's really important for the Tri-Cities to continue to collaborate, work together, and understand the needs of the respective municipalities, but at the same time, the impact that growth and development may have on the 3 individual municipalities. Thank you.
Good points. Jack?
Nothing now.
Judy?
So this Saturday is Santa in the Pines in the Village, sponsored by the Pinehurst Business Partners and the Mira Foundation for support of them this year. Next Tuesday night is U.S. Kids Parade, an Olympic-style parade down through the Village. It starts at 6 o'clock. And then one of the most exciting things is that we have a new vendor, new merchant coming to town in the Village, and that's C-Cups, the famous cupcake producer over in Southern Pines, is opening a second store in the corner store of the department store building. And that's I don't know why they would choose to bring cupcakes on the same day as the U.S. Kids Parade, but I'd say that's darn good planning on their part.
Yeah.
Anyway, a welcome addition to our village.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, I have nothing, so we will go to the next item on our agenda, and that is our consent agenda. All these items can be approved under one motion since they are routine.
I move to approve all items listed and considered routine on the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion by Kevin Drum and a second by Jack Farrell. Is there any discussion?
I'd like to add one thing to this. These public safety reports are important, I believe. They list what the fire department's been doing, what the police department's doing, the number of arrests, the trend year to date, and kudos to the fire department, talking about the number of days without an injury, without a loss. That's a big deal. So I think they're worth looking at by the public. I think they're important. I'd also like to note something relative to the police report, and because our numbers are quite small, to tell you the truth, in almost every category. The number that's growing in volume is narcotics and drugs. We probably all know that. But I thought I'd point out that some rather interesting information was just released by the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration on oxycodone and hydrocodone in particular, which is only about 3/4 of the opioid pills. But anyway, they broke it down by county and by pharmacy. And so I just share a little bit of information. In a 6.5 year period recently, to Moore County, there was 34,862,000 of those pills sent to Moore County. That's about 58 pills per person per year. Okay. And so this is a serious issue, obviously. I mean, so it's really, we should all be aware of this issue, and we should be thankful that our police department is staying on top of it to the best they can. I mean, it's out of control in a lot of places. I think we've got it reasonably under control, so that's kudos to them. Now, the second point is a personal item. A good friend of my wife had a fire at her house a few weeks ago. Seems like a bolt of lightning hit a tree right next to her house and drove one of the branches burning into her attic. And she didn't realize this for a number of hours, actually. Finally realized that something was wrong, called the fire department, and she said it was amazing how fast they were there, how professional they appeared, and how well they were able to take care of things, being conscious of of the house and trying to cause as little damage as possible while getting the fire put out. She was also very impressed that when it appeared everything was over, they went out to the truck and brought in the infrared detection device that detects hot spots and found a small part of the attic was still warm and could possibly cause another fire. And she was very amazed at the equipment they had and the professionalism, so I just wanted to share that. So we should all be thankful as to the public safety departments that we have. They're doing a great job.
That is amazing. Thank you, Jack. We do kind of skip over these reports because they're routine, but I agree they're very important. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion? If not, let's vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Thank you. Beth, that's unanimous. Next is number 5. Looks like we're going to get a new HPC member.
And I'd like to ask Molly Gwynn and Richard Vincent to come on up. Richard is our nominee to fill the current vacant seat on the HPC.
Okay. Welcome.
Well, it is with great pleasure that I introduce Richard Vincent to you. He is fairly newcomer to Pinehurst. He's a resident in the Historic District, moved here about, I'm going to say 3 years ago, and renovated a home. And so he's been through the HPC process from the other side. He works for Par 5 Development, does a good bit of many commercial projects, mostly out of state, big projects. So once again, he's had that experience of being an applicant in the zoning process.
Okay.
When you hear Richard speak, you'll know that he comes from somewhere else originally, which is South Africa. And is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I mean, that's spot on. It's the first time I ever came to Pinehurst, I was actually 7 or 8 years old, and my South African family came out here for a vacation. So it's always the smell of the pine straw. This area has always resonated with me, and as luck would have it, 25 years later, we ended up living here, my wife and I. So we've only been here for 3 years, but maybe the nostalgia, it's always carried a special place in our hearts. So.
Okay. Do any council members have any questions or comments of either Richard or Molly?
You must have had a good experience in your application to the HPC.
I did.
Oh, there you go.
I did. And it was I guess despite the fears of going through the Historic Preservation Commission, it was a very enjoyable experience for me 2 years ago. But we were also guided by Mark Parson and had a good experience, and I see some familiar faces as well. So.
Great.
Okay.
Maybe you can bring some of your great world professional golfers from South Africa to visit too, and showcase Pinehurst with them for them.
We'd love that. Somehow that skill set missed me. So.
Okay.
I tend to support Molly, who you want on your committee, so.
Well, and Richard brings a different perspective of youth. We tend to be a little bit older on the commission, and so I'm just delighted that he has time to do this and wants to do this.
I had noticed that, Molly, that he was a little bit
Didn't wanna
younger
say
than.
that.
Thank you, Richard.
No, than everybody
up.
on the
Thank you.
commission. Everybody on the commission, so we're very pleased to have you.
Ready for a
Appreciate
motion?
it. Thank you.
Okay, we have a resolution.
I move to approve Resolution 19-16, appointing Richard Vincent to the Historic Preservation Commission.
Second?
We have a motion by Judy Davis and a second by Jack Farrell. Is there any discussion? If not, I'll ask for your vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say no. Thank you very much, both of you. That's unanimous, Beth.
Congratulations and welcome.
Congratulations. Thank you, Molly.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay. Always nice to see a fresh young face, isn't it? Okay, next on our agenda, we're going to sell someone his service revolver.
Yep, you want to come on up, Angie?
I'm probably going to be making several trips for this very reason over the next several months.
That's right, there are
So
several retirements. for
that
sure.
is correct. So Jesse Cheek has requested to purchase his service revolver as part of his retirement package, which we do have a policy, and actually there's general statute that allows you to grant him that opportunity to purchase his revolver. He has served over 20 years. I think he's closer to like 28. So anybody over 10 could purchase their revolver for $1. So I just need your permission in order to do that. And he has already secured all the proper permits for the revolver.
I think we have a motion for this as well.
I move to approve the request of retiring Lieutenant Jesse Cheek to purchase his service revolver and be awarded his badge upon retirement.
I second that.
We have a motion by Mr. Bouldry and a second by Mr. Drum. Is there any discussion? If not, let's vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say no. It's unanimous. Thank you, Angie.
Thank
Angie,
you.
do I get a service revolver when I complete 10 years?
Only if you had one as mayor.
Oh,
Concealed
didn't issue me
carry.
one. Didn't think I'd need it. Thank you, Angie. Okay, next. We have a birdie report. So here comes Carlton and Lauren.
Good evening, Village Council,
Welcome.
and to the public that's here. We are here to present the Fire Department Emergency Response Birdie Report. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Lauren Craig. I'm the Performance Management Director, and to my left I have Carlton Cole, our Fire Chief. We're going to tag team the presentation as we go along this evening. We have a lot of information to cover. I'm sure you all have seen the report that is attached to the agenda item that does include a lot of detailed information. We're going to try to keep it as concise as possible for this presentation purpose. But as we go along, if you have any questions, feel free to just stop us. We'll make sure we'll reserve a time at the end for questions as well. But there is a lot of information. So if you have questions as we go along, please interrupt us at any point and let us know. All right. So we'll go through a quick overview of the Birdie. And first, I'll start with what Birdie stands for. And so Birdie is an acronym. It is a process improvement methodology that we use to evaluate our key processes here at the Village. We identify what birdies we are going to evaluate during the strategic operating plan development process. And the Birdie acronym, you'll see it up on the screen, it stands for bringing the opportunity forward, investigating the opportunity, reviewing potential solutions, determining the solution, implementing the solution, and then finally coming back and evaluating to see if it improved our performance as we had hoped. I do want to recognize at this time our Birdie team members, some of which are here this evening. These Birdie team members met over the course of about 7 months to evaluate the fire department emergency response process. Jeff Sanborn, the village manager, was on this team and helped lead that, as well as Councilmember Bouldry. And Mr. Bouldry, we do appreciate your service on this. It is very important for us to have a council member's participation on all of our Birdie teams. I know many of you have served on those in the past, and we appreciate the perspective that you have to offer as we go through potential solutions to evaluate, as well as ways that we can implement change moving forward. So thank you for that. Carlton and I were the co-facilitators of that process. Donna Page, our fire and life safety educator, was on the team. Angie Cantor, our human resources director, was on the team as well. Randy Kuhn, our fleet maintenance director, and also J.R. McLaughlin, who was one of our firefighters. So thank you to everyone for their work on this evaluation. This Birdie evaluation for the fire department emergency response, you don't get saved by the bell today. It addresses our balanced scorecard goal to safeguard the community. So we're all very familiar with our balanced scorecard, and this one in particular addresses that goal. So this up here on the screen is what the team sought out to evaluate. We wanted to know, how can the village improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the village's fire department emergency response process? Here at the village, as you all know, we like to make fact-based decisions, and that's important to us. So the Birdie team took time to evaluate thoroughly our current process and form a set of recommendations to present to you this evening. On the next slide, you'll see an overview of those 5 Birdie team recommendations. The first recommendation is to increase the minimum staffing level of our fire department to 9 firefighters per shift. And the way that the team recommends doing this is by hiring 1 full-time firefighter as a floater who will float among the 3 shifts. And we will also recommend supplementing the remaining vacancies of any shifts by using additional reserve hours and 6 reserve positions. The next is to replace the current rescue truck as scheduled on our fleet maintenance plan with a new rescue truck that's right-sized and better for what we need it to do. The third is to evaluate the need and location for a future fire station, and we're calling it Fire Station 93. The fourth is to amend the PDO and the municipal code, and that's regarding minimum signage requirements for residential addressing of residential properties. And then last is to implement real-time technology for our fire apparatus using our current supplier, Southern Software. And so we'll dive into those a little bit deeper here shortly. So I will hand it over to Carlton to talk about the process.
Lauren mentioned we used the Birdie process, and part of that, what we looked at, we reviewed current fire department emergency response procedures and the process in that, taking into account how calls are processed at 911 all the way through us arriving on scene of the emergency, how we clear that call and then respond to the next call. We determined if key stakeholder requirements are met, with key stakeholders being our customers, the citizens, businesses, and visitors to the village, as well as our employees. We identified root causes of why some requirements are not being met, and also identified and evaluated alternative solutions to help meet those key requirements. Key information and data that the Birdie team reviewed, as I mentioned, we looked at the processes for fire department emergency response, the suppliers from the caller to 911 to the customer requirements, key performance indicators related to the fire department's emergency response, and also other data that we collected relative to the dispatch, addressing requirements within the village, calls for service, the different types and staffing demands, and as well as the vehicles that we respond with to those calls.
So we used a SIPOC to map out the current process and identify requirements to meet stakeholder needs. We use SIPOCs here at the village to document our current processes, to determine how to improve them, and then also when we create a new process, we start with the SIPOC. So this is like one of our tools that we have in our toolkit that help us to really evaluate what are the appropriate steps for a process and what are those requirements that we need to have in place in order to provide excellent service to our residents and businesses here in the village. You will see that's what the SIPOC looks like. I know it's very small print up there, but it does stand for suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, and customers. That's what SIPOC stands for. And within this process, as I mentioned, we determine what the requirements should be. And we, within the team, identified a few requirements, I should say, that are not currently being met. And you'll see on the screen the reasons why. Once we performed a root cause analysis, we determined why they're not being met. So one of the first requirements for us here at the village, a requirement that we have, is that there should be visible posting of an address for first responders. Upon doing the root cause analysis, we determined that there's probably a lack of public awareness of those requirements. Not many people understand what the municipal code and what the PDO says about making sure your address is visible on your property and where it should be located and that sort of thing for the first responders. The second requirement is that there should be appropriate and well-located fire stations. The root cause of that is that the physical road system is not conducive to quick response from the 2 current fire station locations. The third is we need adequate staffing levels. and we've determined that the current authorized staffing levels are not sufficient given turnover, authorized absence, and overlapping calls. The fourth requirement is that we have appropriate vehicles. We determined that the current rescue truck that we have had for quite some time now is not ideal for medical or rescue calls. And then lastly, we need an ease of travel for response. And the increased traffic, which we discussed many, many times, as well as large construction vehicles and even the train, can cause a disruption for the travel routes when responding to calls. Of course, all of this has to do with really the top requirement that we are not currently meeting, and that's timely response for our customers. All of these that you see up here on the screen tie directly into those, but also over the last few years, as Carlton mentioned, we took a good look at our key performance indicators, and over the last few years, the village has seen a decrease in the percentage of calls that have had a response time of 6 minutes and 30 seconds or less. And seeing that trend has really caused us to pause, and that's really the reason that we're here of evaluating this process currently. Okay? I'm going to get into that a little bit more, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this graph here to explain it a little bit further. So this graph correlates our incidents with our response times and our reaction times. So I'll start with the green bar on here. The green bar shows our total incident count. So the village has experienced a significant increase of incidents over the last few years. You'll see especially the jump from FY16 to FY17, which some of those are due to the partnership with Moore County to be a medical first response agency. We partnered on with them in December of 2015. We have seen a 67% increase of incidents going from FY14 to FY18. If you'll move to the kind of gold tan color, those are the overlapping calls. Overlapping calls are received when we're already actively responding to another call for service. They are included in that total incident count, so they're not in addition to that. And you'll see in FY18, we had about 11% of calls as overlapping calls. From FY14 to FY18, they went from 73 to 150 overlapping calls. And if you look, FY19 on there does have an asterisk on it, and that's because that is 6 months of data. When we were reviewing the data, we wanted to look at where we were currently at after 6 months of FY19 relative to kind of where we've been before. And you'll see that those overlapping calls already in the first 6 months of FY19 were already exceeding what they were in FY18. Next is reaction time. So reaction time is measured from the time that 911 notifies us until the wheels are rolling out of the fire station. This is primarily controlled internally with few variables to get out the door. And this has definitely been a focus for improvement over the last few years. As you can see, a steady increase in our percentage of times that we've gotten out the door within 90 seconds or less. In FY18, we were at 88%. So strong numbers there for our reaction time over the years. That is shown in the green, so you see that green bar, or the green line, I should say. The red line is our response time. Response time is from the 911 notification until the first due apparatus arrives on scene. This is influenced by external factors once the engine leaves the station. So that red line has shown a linear decline for the percent of times that we've achieved our response time goal of 6 minutes and 30 seconds or less. So in FY18, we achieved only 68% of the time at 6 minutes and 30 seconds or less. Okay? Does anybody have any questions on this graph?
I do, Lauren.
Yes.
Does the fire department have the same traffic preemption device as the police department does, or was that for the fire department?
Was for the fire department.
Okay.
Yeah, police departments don't have traffic preemption because the cars will overshoot the intersections. They move at a faster pace.
Right, they're smaller.
They don't take as long to accelerate. so the light wouldn't have time to cycle to the green to give them
Right.
access
Right.
till they're already through the intersection.
Okay. So you do have the ability, it's the ability to stop to change the light so that the fire truck can get through on a green light, yeah, for the public. Thank you.
If I could comment on this slide, I think a key takeaway here is that through leadership efforts within the fire department, Carlton and other folks, and focusing on this issue of getting out the door in 90 seconds or less and working with the 911 center, even though we're doing better at getting out the door in 90 seconds or less, our overall response times are getting worse. And so where you see that drop in our ability to meet that 6:30 time, it's actually kind of compounded because it's also eating up additional time that we were making up on the front end.
And do you have this data by day part?
Yes,
And what does that look like, just anecdotally?
similar. I'm not sure what,
Well, what I mean, if you looked at it by day part, different hours of the day, is it worse in the morning, worse at night?
yeah, there are peak,
Oh, yeah.
Carlton can.
Roughly
yeah.
9 in the morning until about 7 or 8 at night is our peak times. And you can see, if you look at a bell curve, it's almost identical to a bell. So it peaks 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon and then starts to slope back down for the evening.
In the morning, you're beating the 6 minutes, but at 3 o'clock, you're not. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I guess
That's number of incidents.
our call
Yeah,
volume
call volume.
is like that.
Right, but what about your response time is what I'm asking.
Carlton, looks like you're going to have over 2,000 incidents this year.
Sir, this is likely.
Do you know what the red line, if you extended it, this right now, where it would be?
So I looked at it today. Our FY19 numbers, I believe, are around 63%. So we dropped from
Important
68% to 63% in FY19,
Curve's
from
going
what I know
down.
right now.
And the 6-minute and 30-second bar comes from,
National standards and
Okay.
the Center for, or Commission on Fire Accreditation is
they
where
feel
where we
that's the
established that
appropriate
from.
standard. Okay.
Right. Mhm.
And kind of truth in lending, do fire stations generally make 6 minutes and 30 seconds? I think in general, probably not. I think in general, we're probably doing okay. But we aspire to,
Absolutely.
to
Right.
do great things here in the village. I can share with you that I'm not a firefighter, but I'm intimately familiar with my experience on Fort Bragg, and it's the same standard that we use to assess the capabilities of our fire department on Fort Bragg and its 7 fire stations.
Judy, to answer your question, I don't believe that we have we have not correlated our response times directly to times of day. We do have it, of course, on the next slide, you'll see for where the locations are, but I don't know that we necessarily have it for time of day. That's a good question. We'll look into that.
I can run a report for that and get
Okay.
it to you. I don't think we produce that currently.
Yeah, I think it's intuitive to say that in all likelihood, we have our greatest challenges with meeting response time at peak traffic hours of the day,
I mean, that makes sense.
because otherwise, everything else is pretty much equal.
Carlton, let me just ask one more question. In all of these responses or calls, do you count like calls when somebody calls and says they're,
Cats in the tree.
no, well, I didn't call about the cat in the tree, but I did call about my fire,
These were just emergency calls, so lights and
is
siren.
just
when we
emerged.
respond.
Okay, thank you.
So we actually broke it down even further within the Birdie team, and we looked at, based on the overlapping calls, what types are they that we're getting, so that we can also better identify, are we out on a fire call and we're getting a call for service that may just need 2 firefighters to respond? Or is it we're out on a fire call and we have another fire call or an EMS call that we need to run, and we have too many resources already dedicated at the first call, and we don't have enough capability to be able to run the second call? In those cases, when that happens, I believe we calculated it's about 6% that we could impact if we had an additional resource for that. But we do have automatic aid within the county that picks that up when we're not able to respond. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So here you'll see the dots in orange and in red signify that we did not meet our response time of 6 minutes and 30 seconds. And you'll notice the trend, I've kind of circled it there. We've had the longer response times trending in the Lake Pinehurst and Pinewild neighborhoods. The secondary issues are primarily in the CCNC area, Morganton Road CCNC area, as well as Pinehurst number 6.
Is that what that lower circle is, primarily CCNC?
That's CCNC.
Okay.
It
thank
is. By reviewing this data as well, we kind of thought about where our fire stations are located. We also look at the winding roads of Pinehurst, and we don't really have a grid system. We don't have a straight shot a lot of times, especially in the Lake Pinehurst area. So that's the reason we do have a recommendation to further evaluate the location of our fire stations and the need for possibly a future fire station.
And also, roads are not conducive to passing vehicles, especially in a large vehicle, or for people to pull onto the shoulder, because in a lot of cases, they're not shoulders,
Right.
so that they yield us right away in response.
Can I ask, on the address issue, is it concentrated, is it all over the place where addresses aren't properly displayed? Because I know in the village, it's really not properly, very few addresses are even right. They go 70 to 80 to 90 to, they go all over the map. Is it all over the place where people aren't posting address? Or?
The areas that we are aware of where addresses are out of sequence have been addressed through the county GIS department. They handle addressing.
Okay.
Other areas, as we recognize that, businesses we can enforce through fire code to make sure the address is posted, and that's something that we do check. New homes as they're built, planning and inspections actually has a checklist that they verify the address is posted at the time they prepare to issue the CO. It may be taken down after that.
Yeah.
So that may be some of it. It may be that the address numbers are put on a post in the front of the house and a vine grows to cover it. So it's obstructed by trees or shrubs, decorations, or things like that.
So it's all over the map, all over
It is
the
widespread.
widespread.
I think there was another thing that came out as a result of our analysis, though, that even for new homes, particularly the ones that are on a corner lot, sometimes there wasn't clarity in the language in our PDO that required them for that address to be visible from the street to which the address corresponds.
Right.
So,
Yeah, it's where the front door faces whatever the street is, because 6 Wampanoag for me is just up the street from 6 Cohasset, and so we have mail going back and forth or deliveries going back and forth. But we also talked about the size of the numbering for that house and how it should be appropriate displayed and where it should be displayed, particularly on some homes that may be recessed well back from the main street. I think along Linden Road, there could be some homes that are well back, so that's one of the recommendations that's come up also, as well as a good deep dive into the legislation, which would dictate the size and location of where house numbers should be posted.
I think I would point out that we have come a long way with the county GIS system, because it wasn't too many years ago that every house in CCNC was addressed 1600 Morganton Road, H4, C9, and it took, well, I don't want to say what it took. It took a lot to require them. They had to buy into readdressing the entire place to have actual addresses. And I know you've been through that, Carlton.
There have been several areas in the village that's occurred since I've been here. The county's always seeks input from us and how to best do that. Emergency response is important to have your address posted so that we can find you when we're needed. Also, flip side, I understand how painful it is to change your address and the steps that you have to go through in doing that.
Right, it is painful. Yep.
Now, this is our fire district you're talking about here, obviously more than just the municipality. It looks like it runs down well into Pine Bluff here. Am I incorrect in that assumption?
The thick red line, that's where Pine Bluff Fire District joins us. That's Sandywood Farm and the lower side of Linden Road, Road Extension. That's just where Pine Bluff's district joins our fire district.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. I'm sorry.
Now I get to try to explain what an effective response force is. So an effective response force, we have run cards at the county. So when they receive a call for an incident in Pinehurst, they have predetermined resources that they dispatch. What that does is, what I've had to do in looking at different call types is try to evaluate the risk plus the resources that I need them to deploy to accomplish the outcome that we look for. So is it to cut a victim out of a car? Is it to put a fire out in a home? Is it to put a wildland fire out? And in that, it calculates number of vehicles, number of personnel needed, and the amount of equipment to help complete required safety, complete required task in a safe manner. A common question is, why do we have so many fire trucks at a home fire or a structure fire? Fire trucks bring people, and that's the main thing. So we're looking for 17 to 20 people to be at a structure fire for us to operate safely. There's a lot of different tasks that go on, and some people monitor what goes on. They track the people on the scene. They make sure that the scene continues to operate in a safe manner. And as they complete the labor-intensive task of firefighting, in especially hot weather in full turnout gear and air pack, they have to come out and go through a rehab process before we allow them to go back in. That's for the health of the firefighter and to make sure they stay safe, as well as being there to do their job. So worst case for us, and what the little pictogram shows, the red fire trucks are ours, the black fire trucks are other resources that come in. So worst case for us, and I kind of say that tongue-in-cheek because it could always be worse, but a structure fire is what we typically think of as the worst case scenario. We would receive the battalion chief, which is the detached fireground commander, would respond to command the scene, make sure resources there, track the personnel on scene. The rescue truck responds as a service company with additional resources, and 2 fire engines respond. That's the initial response from our fire department. The effective response force is achieved at the same time we're dispatched. Surrounding communities send resources to us, so they're on the initial page, and those black fire trucks make up the resources that they would send to us based on the way that the run cards are set up. That makes sense.
In a big piece of this analysis that we used this type of a framework for was to study the effects of calls and overlapping calls. And while it's true that we staff currently to a level of 9 per shift, quite often our shifts only are functionally manned by 7 people. And what we'd like to do is drive that up, because it allows us to address some of these overlapping calls better. Even though it's only 6%, it's 6% we can go after.
I know that, of course, that Harris Teeter and Lowe's Shopping Center, they're not in Pinehurst, but are they in our fire district?
Yes.
We contract with Taylortown to
So there
provide
are,
service for
yeah,
them.
okay.
Okay, great. So we will go through the detailed recommendations a little bit further. This was great discussion. All right, the first recommendation is to increase the minimum staffing level of the fire department to 9 firefighters per shift. We currently have a minimum of 7, and that is due to other OSHA requirements and other regulations that we have to abide by in order to keep 2 fire stations open. If we fall below 7 firefighters on a shift, we have to close one of our fire stations. So in order to do that, we have to do 7. So what the team is recommending is not 7, but increase that to 9. We determined that based on a review of shift schedules. We reviewed approved leave time. We reviewed the efficient response force diagram that you just saw. And we also looked at the call volume for that recommendation, knowing that if we want to utilize our vehicles in the best and most appropriate way, we also have to have the number of people to respond on those vehicles. So as Jeff mentioned, we could impact the 6% of those overlapping calls if we had, if we staffed at 9 firefighters rather than staffing at the minimum of 7. The team also recommends hiring, by doing this, they recommend hiring 1 full-time equivalent firefighter as a floater among the 3 shifts and supplementing the remaining vacancies with additional reserve hours and 6 reserve positions. This position will be a unique position. We don't have a floater firefighter, I keep calling it that, but a floater firefighter we've never had before. This person will work on all 3 shifts in order to keep that level, that staffing level higher. That person will report most likely directly to the deputy fire chief. Yep,
With input from the shift supervisors.
exactly.
And this may kind of sound like an odd application of human resources. What this is designed to address is the fact that due to the unique scheduling requirements for firefighters and the number of hours they can work, they all have this periodic day off called a Kelly Day, which leaves their corresponding shift 1 person short on the day that they're off. And so the idea is to if we hire 1 full-time firefighter and just plug them into all those Kelly days, it's equivalent to 1 full-time position. So that's that piece of it. And I mentioned the fact that we want to go to 9 in order to solve a lot of this response time problem. We recognize that while overlapping calls was a pretty big deal, it still was only 6%. When you go back and look at that map again and the issue with those areas on our outskirts where we're just not meeting time requirements, that's a different problem. It's a geographic problem. And we can't solve that solely by going to 9 people in our 2 existing fire stations, because it's still a drive time problem. And so you all recall that the additional 1 FTE was in the budget that you approved for this year. We made the decision not to recommend hiring these additional reserve officers until potentially until we open a 3rd fire station, because that's where that resource can be most, we can get the most bang for the buck out of that resource.
Do we have the facilities to accommodate another person?
This would just bring each shift to par. Every shift would be, they would staff every 28-day cycle at 9 people, whereas 1 person on the shift will be off. The way the shift works is that they work 9 days in a 28-day cycle. The 3rd cycle, they work 10 days. So the 10th day, 1 shift for the entire 3rd cycle, 1 person is off on the shift. That person would just fill in for those people being off. So
Are they likely to be at the main station here, or, because we have facilities, more facilities there?
It is likely, yes, sir.
Right.
It may be that they're at the other station, someone else comes over here, but
Right.
it's more than likely that the load of people will be here.
Bigger kitchen.
And do you, so do you have a rotation for the floater? I mean, you're saying you're going to hire 1 person who's going to do nothing but float,
Right, they'll
rather
work,
than cycle people in and out of that
right.
floating job?
They'll work.
Somebody that's accustomed to that. It becomes their routine, if you will.
Sure.
They'll have a Kelly day as well, and that would likely be the first day of their 28-day pay cycle. That would give them time off to prevent them from working multiple shifts in a row, and then they would just transition to the next shift. So they would work A shift, B shift, C shift, and then repeat that, or whatever, when they start, whatever order it falls in. But they would just rotate between the 3 shifts and work nine shifts every 28 days.
The fire department scheduling is
You need
a little complicated.
I was afraid scheduling would come
Need an
up.
advanced math degree for this one.
We have tried to draw out diagram after diagram of this thing, and they get it and they understand it, but to interpret it is very challenging.
To get colored pencils out for Lauren.
Yes, he did. He did.
And maybe to illustrate how challenging it is, if you go over to the fire station, Carlton can show you a map or a calendar that's on the wall. It's basically whiteboards where they're mapping out shift work for the next year or two. Yeah. So it's a challenge.
You know, and we staff for shifts, but then of course we have vacations or we have mandatory trainings and things that have to be, you know, done that are not, you know, you don't have an active firefighter on shift ready to respond. And so it's also trying to juggle that. As Jeff mentioned, typically we have on average about, I think it's 7.8 people with them when we looked at an 8-month period, 18-month period. On average, that's the number that we have on shift rather than 9. We did a full evaluation of this. We tried to get creative. We looked at a lot of creative solutions for this. We also weighed the risk of, you know, we looked at an option of hiring 3 full-time equivalents and gone ahead and recommended that. But, you know, we weighed the risk and we looked at what might be kind of a hybrid option, and that's really what this is it's a first step. Let's put forward the 1 FTE, try this floater option, see if that can raise those staffing levels higher, and then supplement. We're going from about 4,000 hours for the reserve program to about 8,500 hours that we would utilize a reserve firefighter. And again, that is something that, and we'll show it in the implementation as well, but that would not be budgeted for until FY 2022. So it's kind of a phased approach with this recommendation, but it does allow for more consistent staffing levels, appropriate staffing for vehicles. It meets the ISO and NFPA standards better. We are better positioned for responding to the overlapping calls, as well as it being really the most cost-effective solution of the ones that we evaluated.
So you don't think, what level of difficulty do you think there'll be in hiring this particular unique schedule person?
I don't think that it's a full-time position. I don't think we would have difficulty in hiring for it. I would imagine when a full-time position on a permanent shift opens, that they would request to transfer to that. So you kind of consider it an entry-level position.
Yeah, so this will be constantly changing, entry level.
Advantage to it, they'll get a lot of different, a lot of opportunities to work with different management styles and people to see how the department operates.
All right, we'll move to recommendation number 2, if that's okay with you all. Oh, that's you. I'm sorry, my apologies.
I was going to let you go with it. Recommendation 2 was to replace our current rescue truck. Some may know that truck was purchased as a surplus beverage truck and converted into a rescue truck. That's when the rescue squad kind of gave up the rescue aspect of medical and just took over the medical responder part of things back in, I think it was 2004, 2005. We converted it to that. So it's not being used for what it was truly designed for. It came due in the replacement plan to replace last year, or fiscal year 19, and through the budget discussions, we opted to push it out a year so we could fully analyze and evaluate the need and what is the best method to provide that. So it is currently in the capital improvement plan to replace, and what we're looking to do is purchase the right size truck for our needs. So we're going to have a manufacturer come in, take a look at it, look at the equipment that we are required to carry, design the truck based on that so we can size the truck down and make sure that it does meet our needs and carry all of the equipment that we need to. Also, it'll kind of multitask for our staff to allow them to, or cross staff, I guess, so that they can respond to medical, fire, or service demands for that, which is the structure fire carries the extra equipment. So it's a multi-use truck. They would look at what our needs are and just design compartment layouts. It'd be a Freightliner, such as kind of the garbage trucks or Freightliner chassis, and then the box on the back of it would be designed for what we need it to. It's not something you can't go to a dealership and buy it, or it's unlikely that you could find one to meet your needs. This coupled with the first recommendation for staffing also would allow us to use dedicated staff to use the vehicle more often, which we haven't been able to do in the past for differing call types. And in our analysis of the cost to run the equipment, we determined that the cost to run the rescue truck is much more feasible and a lot less expensive than running fire engines to the medical calls. We could do that with 2 people compared to 3 or 4 on the fire engines.
Yep, so it was $3.07 per mile to run a fire engine and only 58 cents per mile to run the current rescue truck. We also looked at possibly switching it out for Tahoes as well. We would need 2 Tahoes in order to accommodate the needs for the services, but it was, although it was a better, I guess, price point to do it that way, it would not have met the needs for the equipment that we would need on there, as well as needing to run vehicles with 2 staff instead of 1 inside.
And it also presents challenges for staff when they have to move between differing vehicles for different call types. Something will get left behind. We had a situation that a helmet was left at the station when they arrive on scene of a fire in a neighboring community. It just happens. They're in a hurry, they grab everything, and it's laying there on the ground when they get back. So it's we're trying to assign people to the, here's what your responsibility is for today, this is the truck that you'll be on, and they know that's what they're doing. They put their equipment on there, have it set there by the truck, get in their gear and go. And recommendation 3, get 2 slides in a row. Part of what we found with the other things we've discussed in the road system and various factors with Pinehurst and the uniqueness to the community, we recommend that there's a second team formed to evaluate the need and location for a 3rd fire station. Part of that will take into consideration, or what should be taken into consideration with that team, is the comprehensive plan and future growth and development areas for the village. So determining that need, looking for locations, we feel like it would probably be Linden Road near Chicken Plant Road in the Pine Wild area. It'll also help address those response issues for the backside of the lake and Pine Wild.
And then recommendation number 4 is regarding signage requirements for residential addressing, which we have talked about a little bit already. But upon reviewing the requirements of the state fire codes as well as the state building codes, we looked at our PDO and our municipal code, and we identified several ways that we could, or several opportunities for improvement to ensure that we had more consistent wording across the board. And so that's what we're recommending here, is that we propose text amendments for both of those. The text amendments that we are specifically recommending are included in the report to take a look at that. There is nothing significant of a change with this. It really is to make sure that we are being consistent and applying the same standards that the building code and the fire code also have in place for residential addressing. The plan would be to get this through the Planning and Zoning Board and then bring it to the Village Council here in the next few months. And then following that text amendment, we would recommend coordinating a public awareness campaign, probably an electronic type of communication that would go out to just remind people of what those requirements are, why it's important to make sure your address is visible, where it should be located. And I think once people realize what those requirements are, and maybe check your mailbox, make sure it's not overgrown with plants or whatever it might be, to know that the first responders will need to see that if, in case of an emergency, more people might follow those standards, as we will remind them.
You anticipate that this would be a item that we would try to enforce, in the sense of having occasionally people going around and seeing where certain streets and or residences are not marked properly, and then advise them politely or gently?
So Angel currently has this kind of in her purview when it comes to code enforcement. I don't know how proactive we are necessarily on that, but I do know that there have been a handful of times, probably, if even, that she has had to send letters due to a complaint or issue with this. The Planning and Inspections Department, though, upon their which inspection checklist is it? Permit inspection checklist, I believe it is. They have it as an item on there that they do when they go out to the site, and that would be for a new residence, of course. Right. They have to go out and ensure, maybe it's for the COA. CO.
I'd hope the
Use planning
larger,
terms.
the larger the awareness campaign is,
Yes.
the more aggressive you could be in being proactive with enforcement. So I think it's a pretty large awareness education campaign.
I think the preference would always be education over enforcement.
Yeah.
Make every effort to make sure people know and then enforce when it's a last resort that that's what you have to do. Most people will heed the warnings and listen to it. It's not just the fire department, it's police department, it's EMS, anyone you call to your home, it potentially could impact.
I think the village campaign, communication campaign, I'll go back to my crawl, walk, run analogy where you have a good campaign and then you kind of take off from there from communicating, educating, and then enforcing where it's needed.
Just out of curiosity, what is the size requirements for the numbers?
4-inch for residential, 6-inch for commercial.
I got to go home and measure. That on the house and on the mailbox, or just on the house?
On the house.
And they should be of contrasting color to the background material of which they are posted.
Just somewhere visible from the street, right?
They are.
Doesn't have to be on the
Right.
house.
It doesn't have to,
Right.
shall be legible from the road.
Yeah.
Right.
4 inches.
Okay, and recommendation number 5 is to implement real-time route selection technology for our fire apparatus using our current supplier, Southern Software. Currently, our fire apparatus are equipped with mobile data information systems, and that is, did I get that right?
Got it right.
Okay, and that's using Southern Software as our supplier of that technology. It does have GPS capabilities, but not real-time data. So if you think about, when you're traveling and you type in Google Maps for where you're going, you'll see the real-time data to know where backups are, to know maybe where it should reroute you if a road is closed, whatever it might be. Right now, we don't have technology that is capable of doing that within our fire engines. We do have knowledge tests that are done frequently for our firefighters. They're tested on the geographic area of which we respond. So they are very knowledgeable with alternative routes. We try to communicate among each other of when road closures occur. We have notification systems for that as well. But this would just be one more item in place that could help us when needing to know what the real-time data is on the roads at the moment. The Southern Software has indicated they don't currently have this developed, but they are interested in developing this upon Carlton's conversation with them. So we are recommending that we work with them so that we can continue to use MDIS and incorporate that into our current system that we already have. Did I get that right? Okay. All right. So we'll move into the impact of the recommendations.
Performance impact, we evaluated or we projected over a 5-year performance goal. You can see our projection is through the last full year of data that we had was fiscal year 18. So we projected 5 years out to fiscal year 23 and anticipate that with the changes and as they're implemented, our response time of 6 minutes and 30 seconds for our first due apparatus would increase to 75%. Our percent of dispatch emergency calls with reaction time of 90 seconds or less would increase to 90%, and response time in minutes on average would decrease to 5 minutes and 35 seconds.
This is with the implementation of all 5, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
That's right.
Including the third fire station.
I don't.
It did not include that. So that recommendation is to form a team to evaluate it further.
Evaluate
Okay.
the need and location.
So
of
it's
the
not
fire
committing
station.
to it. Right.
And this would take into account preemption and that being implemented at all the stoplights. Adding the floating position to have our FTE or full-time authorized staffing level at 9 primarily, and running the rescue truck as the EMS provider to keep fire engines in place. So we feel like that will move the needle some. And the workforce impact, impact on the fire department means that we're better equipped to respond to emergency calls and the overlapping calls, which are multiple calls are occurring at the same time. We would begin utilizing the right size rescue truck that would be staffed or manned each shift and equipped for a more efficient response. Implement the public awareness and signage campaign for the requirements of addressing for residential properties, which, as we discussed, would help in response and getting to an emergency. And also with the MDIS system and the real-time data, which would tell us where their traffic hinge points are at. That would require minimum training, but staff would have to be trained on what to do with that. There would also be an impact on our human resources and financial services departments, and that's mainly advertising for the position and budgeting for the full-time and reserve firefighters.
And then here on the screen, you'll see what we have summarized as the financial impact. The total implementation costs are estimated to be approximately $759,500. The FY 2020 budget contains approximately $681,000, which includes the one firefighter position, the rescue truck replacement, and the land purchase if needed. And so those have already been included within the FY 2020 budget, as you all are well aware. That does leave the remaining money, which you don't see in the FY 2020 budget, and that's specifically for the reserve firefighter positions and the additional hours that would be needed should we implement that. Again, that will be considered for the budget in FY 2022, following an interim evaluation that will be done to see how kind of the first step of the one firefighter is going.
So what accounts for the difference? Not quite, the 681 versus the 759? Is it the truck more expensive?
Oh, the difference between 659 and 681?
759.
759 and 681 is the reserve hours. It's what we would budget for those additional 8,500 reserve hours that would be needed to implement in 2022.
And the 134.5 is ongoing. The others are
It is.
one-time?
Yes.
Yes.
And the 200,000 is the land purchase.
That's right.
Say that, you're not
Sure, yep.
evaluating the need. You're making a purchase decision.
Well, but we are evaluating the need because, as we had discussed, it's not committing to purchasing that land this year necessarily, unless you all determine to. So, yeah, absolutely. It is, the 200 is not for the evaluation of it. It is for, if determined, it would be for the land purchase.
That will be decided once the evaluation
Yeah.
is fully complete.
Yeah, good point.
Maybe exclude it, because, I read it first as, are you hiring somebody to do this evaluation? I
Right,
forgot
right.
about the land purchase that we
point.
had.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you what harm would be to do education immediately? I mean, I know it's good form to have the text amendment and do the education, but I see if you can get 100 homes to fix their signage, maybe it could have an impact. If you're comfortable with that, I'm just saying.
I think we could.
We are, right? It's going to be,
Yeah.
it's intended for this year.
It'll be in October.
Yeah.
So we have it already scheduled. The text amendment would come to you guys by October, and that's when immediately Melissa is already informed and will be ready to go ahead with some sort of communication out to send out to everybody electronically. We'll get that out over our e-news and social media and other tools that we have for communication.
This might be a print item in the mail, too.
Our neighborhood advisory committee is a good target for things like this. They get things out to their neighborhoods.
We also discussed the newsletter. Our newsletter is
Oh, yes.
highly read here in this area, and so it would be another way that we could get the word out for that.
So we'll start soon. Okay.
Yep.
What about do we have a ROM for the cost of Southern Software, the update?
Our anticipation is, because we're already a customer, it'll be rolled into an update with that. It may change the maintenance agreement that you pay because it is differing technology, but they're not far enough along in the development to determine that and haven't really provided that for us.
So
But
that
that's-
could be an incremental cost.
Good question. It might be
We don't know at
another
this time.
incremental cost.
TBD, okay.
Okay, moving forward, we have a list here on the screen of the key advantages and disadvantages of these overall recommendations. Of course, we've discussed many of these already, but really, what the increase of the minimum staffing level can do, as well as for the rescue truck, for having the better equipped rescue truck to run more EMS calls and having it better equipped for what our firefighters need. we have the opportunity to evaluate and purchase land for a future fire station, and if determined to be appropriate, it would be the first step to signify, or to significantly reduce our response times around the village and to prepare for future growth if determined to add a new fire station at some point in the future. The public awareness campaign will improve our signage for addressing residential homes in order to better help first responders locate those. And then the route selection technology, of course, would help for more efficient routing solutions with using the real-time data. Of course, the disadvantage, as always, is going to be the cost of change and the cost of implementing new things and changing some processes. But we do have that, as we discussed. We've tried to keep you informed. I know Jeff has done an excellent job of kind of keeping you all up to speed of where we're at with the Birdie process, kind of coupled with the budgeting process this year. So we've tried to mitigate that as much as we can in order to make sure we're making the appropriate recommendations for you all.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting as well that the rescue truck replacement was in the 5-year plan already.
Right.
So that wasn't a new incremental cost.
Exactly. And we just really wanted to evaluate it further to make sure that the rescue truck itself was the right methodology. Right. We needed to replace it with an actual rescue truck again.
And was it also 425? The prior version was in it, 425?
Oh, in the previous plan? I don't recall.
400 is for the truck, 25 is for added equipment.
But
or
is that
replacement
is that the number that was in last year's
It was
5-year plan?
I don't think that we increased it, but I'm not sure. I could go back and check. I know at one point it was 650,000, so we reduced that to try to
That's
meet
good.
what
We like that.
So overall, these 5 recommendations represent meaningful change and innovative improvements for the village's processes, and it supports safeguarding the community, a council goal on our balanced scorecard. It addresses a FY 2020 strategic opportunity that you all have identified to determine the need for a future fire station, and then it also addresses our strategic challenge to respond to an increased demand of services and changing needs due to the growth that we've had here in the village of Pinehurst. So we believe that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, and we respectfully request that you approve by consensus these recommendations. I will show you, before we kind of check with your consensus on this, I want to show you the proposed implementation timeline. Kevin, I know you were asking about that, of when the public education campaign and all would begin. We would hope to, as soon as we were ready to go ahead and get the firefighter position posted and begin recruitment for that. We would, by September, the end of September, we would propose those changes, the text amendment changes to the Planning and Zoning Board. We've already been working with the Planning Department on that so that they're well aware of that and that that's coming along. We actually get to use the Excella software, which I'm really excited to be the applicant on that side of things. We would sign the contract to construct the new rescue truck by the end of September. We are proposing to form a new team to evaluate that future location of Fire Station 93 in October, to go ahead and get that team up and starting to look at that. The text amendments would come to you all in October, and then we would begin the public education campaign following that. We plan to receive and pay for that new rescue truck by the end of the fiscal year, and hope to have some progress made with Southern Software for that real-time route selection technology by the end of the fiscal year as well. We would surplus our old rescue truck as standard practice that we do here for our fleet replacement plan. We would perform an interim evaluation in November of 2020, just ahead of the strategic planning retreat in December of 2020, to make sure that we have, we've looked at this, we see how it's going so far with the floater FTE specifically, and want to see that if we need to recommend those additional reserve firefighters and increased hours, that we get that in for the FY 2022 budget next. And then we would complete the full evaluation of the Birdie by June of 2023.
And where do you see the study being completed for the third fire station?
Good question. I think a lot of it will depend on kind of what that team is taking in for their inputs for that. I know the comp plan will be a significant input for that. We've discussed, any growth north of the village and any discussion of water or any other possibilities that we would need to take into consideration. But I think it really depends on kind of the scope for that team. It would be a separate team. It wouldn't be a Birdie, and it would have the appropriate staff members on it that have the expertise in that area.
Any more questions for Carlton and Lauren? I think we have been asking all along, so great data. You have done
Great
a great
presentation.
job. Yes, great job.
Public safety is job one for the village, so
Exactly.
thank you.
I would make a motion that the village council approve the recommendations and timeline as described in the fire department Birdie.
Okay, I think we just need a consensus. Can we just reach consensus?
Motion, you're willing to vote on a motion?
Either way.
Okay. Do we have a second to Jack's motion?
Second.
We have a motion by Jack Farrell and a second by Judy Davis. Is there any further discussion? If not, let's vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say no. It's unanimous. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carlton.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Carlton, for your job every
More
day.
formalized than consensus. We want you to move. Thank you both. Okay, next, number 8. Who's going to do number 8?
We have the library needs assessment. Natalie and Jeff and I have gone through and assessed the 8 RFPs that came in, and we've got a recommendation for 4 consultant teams that we would recommend that you interview. Go ahead, Natalie.
Oh, we're waiting for Natalie.
Y'all did that so quick, I didn't remember.
Oh. Gosh.
All right, as Jeff mentioned, we have before you on this agenda item a recommendation to interview a handful of firms that have submitted proposals for the request for proposal that we sent out for library services needs assessment. And as you can see in the memo there, we received 8 proposals in total, and the attachment at the bottom of this agenda item gave you the bid tabulation sheet so you could see all 8 firms that responded by the July 5th deadline that was posted. And then we had a selection committee, as Jeff mentioned, that consisted of himself, me, as well as Jeff Batten. And each of us individually scored all 8 proposals using the criteria that was outlined again in the request for proposal and that are listed there on the screen for the audience. After we individually scored them, the 3 of us met and formed a consensus and agreed that the top 4 scoring firms we would recommend council consider bringing in for an interview. Previously, we talked about potentially 3, but we felt that these 4 were scored fairly consistent, as you can see there on the selection committee score summary sheet that I just provided. Of these 4 firms, 3 are really library consulting firms. 1 is more of an architectural firm, and that is Ratio that's listed there. 3 of them are from out of state. Godfrey's Associates is out of Texas. Library IQ is out of Maryland. Ratio's got a Raleigh office in North Carolina, and then Shepherd Associates is out of Florida. We also thought I'd share with you, per Judy's request, we did actually receive some communication from a couple of these firms that we've listed here in advance of them submitting their proposal, and I wanted to kind of share that with you. So 2 of the 4 firms listed there did contact me directly and asked some follow-up questions in terms of submission requirements, questions about could they do this or reorganize their response in a certain way, those kinds of things. And those two firms were Godfrey's Associates out of Texas, and in fact, I exchanged several emails with him, and with Dick Waters, who is their primary contact. And then I also received questions from Kim Boland at Ratio. So those are the two firms that did a little, reached out, as I said, to me in advance. And then in addition, another representative from Ratio actually came to Pinehurst, and I met with him personally. Wanted to get some just additional background on the library. I believe he did actually go to the library, so I felt like they really did their homework in terms of trying to understand the community. And I'll also point out that Ratio is the firm that is designing the new Pinehurst Elementary School. So our experience with that architectural firm, that is the only architectural firm up here, has been positive so far. Okay. So what we've got there is the four firms that we would recommend, and I've put a proposal here in terms of how you might want to schedule interviews. We did this for the comprehensive long-range plan. I think it would be helpful if we could do two-hour interviews per day and spread them over 2 days. I have looked at calendars. I looked at Jeff's calendar and I looked at my calendar. And I have a couple of dates to propose as ranges of when we could potentially hold these interviews. And that is, it looks like we could potentially do them August 6th, 7th, or 8th, or August 12th and 13th, or 14th, 12, 13, or 14.
When is our one meeting in August?
I believe it's the 13th. Mm-hmm. And I think if we did that, it typically takes 3 to 4 weeks to negotiate a contract. And so I think you could potentially have a contract on your agenda at the earliest would be that September 10th meeting that you have.
I'm out of town the 6th, 7th, and 8th,
Okay?
and I can change my work on the 12th.
Would August 12, 13, or 14 work for other council members?
I'm out of town the 14th.
All right, looks like it's 12, 13.
12, 13?
We have a council meeting on the 13th.
It just makes for a long, long day.
Long day. We get to be with each other all day.
All day.
You'll have a break for lunch.
Beat us.
Yeah, so you would break from 11 to 2, and
Okay.
then you'd have a 30-minute break, 4 to 4:30.
Get out of buying us lunch.
Are you planning to give us a structure to the interview?
Question.
So we did that, yes, for the comprehensive long-range plan consultant interviews. I have not gotten that far along in the process yet,
Okay.
but we did in the past, and we can do that for you if you'd like.
One of the things that I thought might be helpful is whoever's going to be the lead on the citizen engagement, we really want to see that person. It was clear in some of the proposals that they had,
Right.
identified somebody, but I think we would want to get a feel for their chemistry, potential chemistry with our community. That'd be great.
I think if we can mirror what the process and the scoring technique that we used for the long-range
like that?
comprehensive plan,
Okay?
I think that did really well, so that, and working into the schedule following the second day of when we will meet with the final two, that we have an opportunity to get all our scores together and then and take a look to see how they come out. I very much like the quality of the 4 proposals that have come in, at least from a content perspective. And for me, just as with the long-range plan, there's bits and pieces of each of the 4 each of these 4 proposals, which I thought were really good, which weren't necessarily reflective in the other 3. So for me, in reading, at least in a quick read, I think we have some quality folks with some good ideas here for the process, and then some are even more detailed with a number of deliverables that are coming, but overall, I thought that the quality of the work was good, and probably need to congratulate the senior staff for taking the time to do the review and then suggesting these for us.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Well, it brings up a point, John, that, which is a very valid one, and there were some ideas and other proposals that didn't make the cut, and which is why we are recommending the statistically valid survey, so, and I can address that in a minute. But I do want to point out that if you look at an individual proposal and you say, ugh, you know, I wish I could combine these two, you can negotiate that with the consultant. So don't, I guess I would say be very open-minded to knowing that, you know, if you were to say, yes, we want to statistically, you know, we want to do a community-wide survey, even though that's not in their proposal, you can negotiate that and should negotiate that if that's your requirement as a council.
Is there an
Okay?
opportunity, you know, you saw what you got on our RFP, and you saw, to Judy's point and John's point, some things more you want to see in this recommunication when they're going to come to talk to us. Can you correct some of that and kind of get it refocused on,
I can certainly
you know what I'm
pass
trying to
along
say, is to
feedback.
get what we want. Just refocus.
Yep, absolutely.
You know, it's about assess how we got here, assess where we are, and assess the options that we have for the future. Some of them went a little too far beyond that, you know, and I thought, you know, and we could just
They're very different proposals.
Very
I
different,
mean, they're
yeah.
very different proposals. That
And
is
I-
for sure.
I had a question, Natalie. I mean, would a firm from Texas really come here for, I guess they don't know it's a $25,000 contract, but I guess we can always,
Well, that's not what their bid
No,
was.
they
That's not
they
what the
gave us
bids
their,
are. It's
No,
a
look at
much
the
more
bids.
expensive contract.
Their
than
bid
that.
was $41,943.
What did we budget for this?
25.
25.
So, right now, we do not have any funds in the FY 2020 budget. Our plan was to do a roll-forward budget amendment for it. So whatever amount it is, it will be a future budget amendment. I confirmed that with Brooke this afternoon.
One firm had 80,000, one we didn't choose.
Correct.
Wonder why.
Yeah.
And then some of these proposals have additional services listed, so,
Even
you know,
Godfrey's
those,
had that.
right, so
But the
that's important too.
refocusing could deal with some of this financial issues, maybe.
It could.
Might
You know,
not.
if you wanted, say, for example, as I mentioned, you've got 3 library consultants and 1 architect. So if you chose to use the, you know, let's just say one of these 4 firms to just do the assessment of the community's desires and preferences, and then you could engage an architectural firm at a later date. I mean, you have all kinds of
Right.
options. You're not required to, by any means, to contract with and engage the firm to do exactly what's in the RFP. But what's in the RFP is, you know, is in the
Baseline.
is what's in the RFP.
I
That's
know,
what
but
we asked
There
them
may
for.
be cost implications
There may
to
be.
doing it that way, though,
Correct.
because it's not a competitive bid type of situation. So if you're asking to tailor something now,
Refocus would be a better term.
that would be you'd have to put it out for bid again if you want it to be competitive and therefore
I think sorry, Jeff, I think the benefit of reading what has been proposed is these are their ideas. And what this allows us to do is to think through how we might want to modulate what they're saying. The other great advantage of having them sit in front of us is, what do you mean by this? How would you do that? So that gives us a better understanding on the execution part of how we would evaluate each of the 4 firms. So I like very much what I've read, and I would very much like to have them come in and tell them what they propose and what it means, and for us to be sure we understand that they know about the village of Pinehurst and the unique situation that they're going to find themselves in. So I'd like to just continue with what we have.
So for example, if one of them recommends a steering committee, that includes these key stakeholders, you can decide who you want to be the key stakeholders on that steering committee.
Yeah, and some of the surveys that are proposed in here, one of the responses was to engage a small group to help with the questions, as others would just say, we're going to do a survey. So
Right.
again, this gives us a chance to kind of
Flesh
boil
that
it
out.
down to what's best for the village.
If there are specific points that you want the consultants to address in the interviews, if it would be helpful for me to, be able to communicate that to them. I also, in the past, asked them to bring previous work product samples so that
Perfect.
you have copies of final deliverables that they've delivered in the past as well. And then they've also provided references. So we will do those reference checks prior to those interviews so that when you do consensus at the end of the fourth interview, we'll have that information for
I
you.
think maybe to add to Judy's point about whoever would be the point of contact with the community, I'm always interested in who the overall manager of the overall effort is.
Absolutely.
Of who is responsible for the quality and the delivery and the timeliness and completeness and thoroughness, that person come along as well. So whoever they want to bring, but I would emphasize that those would be two critical people for us to sit down and hear from and engage.
So who's responsible overall for the engagement as well as
Who
who's
leads the
responsible for the community
citizen
engagement?
engagement, yeah.
Okay.
Let me try this again by staying within the parameters Jeff just gave me on, we're not changing the RFP, but people that want beyond the scope of the RFP, it's worthwhile to refocus them.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say. So
Okay.
does that
If they went
sound better?
beyond.
If they went beyond.
It's worth it for them, it's worth it for us, it's worth it for our public.
Okay. I'll give them
I think
feedback.
realistically, these aren't outrageous prices, to be honest with you. I mean,
They're very reasonable.
Really?
It's on the product.
well,
Yeah.
I'm saying, $35,000 to $45,000 is not incredibly out of line for this type of engagement, in my opinion.
And it's a
In fact,
4-month effort.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I'm surprised that it's that low, to be honest with you. So I'm not alarmed by these. Now, we may have to consider, how much we've allocated and whether a budget amendment's possible and so forth, or whether the scope should be narrowed. Now, they may, if in fact we talk about narrowing the scope, they may lose a little interest in the proposal. I mean, there's a price point at which it's not worth coming from Texas and so forth.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be cheap, I'm just trying to make sure we get what we want, like what Judy said and what John said, consistent.
I always liked anybody that thinks more than what we asked, because that shows me they're thinking for us. So if there's some additional stuff that's in the proposal, heck, I welcome anytime anybody wants to give me more than we're asking, because it may be things that we haven't thought about. And if we don't like, and if it's not something that's consistent with what we would like to do, then we don't press forward with it. But if a consulting company is going to think for us, I'd rather have them think everything and put everything down and let us filter it out.
And I think during your comp plan consultant interviews, I think y'all had excellent dialogue with the consultants, and I would expect nothing different this time around as well.
I agree
So
with
think
John,
you-
I just don't want to take anything away from the public engagement. And if you expand the scope too much, you can't get something without it costing on some end,
Right.
that's all.
How does
On the-
council feel, oh, go ahead, Jeff, I'm
On the
sorry.
cost numbers, as always, I think we need to be careful to look at the fine print. For example, I think
Travel.
if you look at ratios bid, it's realistically, it's more like $58,000 than $48,000
Yeah,
because of the way they,
structure of the reimbursements.
reimbursables, yeah.
Yeah, I know, I saw that.
I guess just as an admin point for responding to the dates, the 12th and 13th are good for me.
Okay.
And what time did you say, the 12th and the 13th?
So I'm proposing 9 to 11 and 2 to 4, but I think to meet John's request to huddle after the fourth interview, maybe we will go ahead and bring in lunch on the second day and maybe move that interview to, say, 1 or 1:30 to give you time to talk before you go in your council meeting, if you'd like to do that. Would that work for everyone?
That'd be good.
Okay.
I got a conflict that I'm going to get rid of.
Okay.
By tomorrow morning, so I'll have 12 and 13th cleared, but I have
Okay.
13th cleared because of a council meeting. I'll get 12 cleared.
Nick, I thought that's when you were taking me to lunch.
Yeah.
He is. It'll just be in the conference room.
It's no problem. I just want you to know
Yeah.
that I just,
I've got to give up something on the 12th too, but.
On the 12th as
easy,
well?
easy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll push that second afternoon interview forward on the 13th. We'll bring in lunch and give you time to talk about them once those are over.
And this should be enough advance timing for them to do some planning and incorporate it into their respective corporate schedules, I would think.
Yeah, I hope so.
I would appreciate seeing sort of what structure you think that interviews should go in. And I'll just mention two things that you might consider. One is track record. And a lot of these case studies that they put in there, it was sort of like they proposed it, but you don't know if it was really ever implemented. In a couple of cases there was clarity on that. But that would be interesting to know,
Okay.
on that.
that's when, I thought we'd get that in the reference portion. I'm assuming would that be correct?
We may. I mean, I do think it's valuable for them to actually share with you what's been implemented, because then we can research it. You can look at it, you can talk to staff, you can see things, so that's fine.
And then we didn't really mention this in the RFP, but, at some point, if we actually move to have a library that's a municipal library, what about that transition? And
Governance.
governance. So to the extent that any of them have any relevant experience, that just might be an interview question, not necessarily that, we're expecting them to go cover it, but that would be useful. I mean, the various experiences that some of them had, from like a bond campaign to other kinds of things, and outsourcing that Library IQ does. I mean, all those things are important concepts for us to understand and have it in our toolbox.
I agree, because in my reading, I keep reading public library, public library, public library, and what we're dealing with here is something that's not 100% public library now, and we're going to expand it to, and it's still going to be a public library. Yeah.
And I had an issue with that with the RFP, and the theory was, Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we'll correct that in the contract, so we still agree with that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we made it very clear that they're to consider all the alternatives. And, becoming a municipal library is only one of several alternatives.
That's where we thought we'd fix that,
Correct.
not delay the project.
Yep. You can address that and make sure that that's clarified for the consultants when you do the interviews. How does council feel about surveys? Because there were a variety of proposals. One firm, and I can't recall of these four versus maybe some of the other, but we heard one firm recommend doing surveys of current library, if you've used the library within the last 12 months, and if you haven't used the library within the last 12 months. So that you could, and I actually think that came from a proposal that didn't make it to the list. In an attempt to try to understand if residents are not using library services, why is that? And then a follow-up question would be, what services would that library need to provide in order to entice you or to cause you to want to use library services? And so, I think we could either do one survey that has kind of two paths to it. If you've used it, fill out questions 1 through 8. If you haven't, fill out questions 9 through 18 or whatever the case may be. But I think what's important here is that we think about asking the consultant to give us a statistically valid survey, similar to how we do our annual community surveys. I think it's important that a decision like this be made on facts, and a fact-based decision. And I think you want to make sure that you've got some good valid data to use. So that was the reason for that recommendation. So I wanted to kind of.
I think that's a good recommendation. You'd have to provide, the population of people to survey, and they can select them randomly, hopefully, and then that would be the only way to do it, I would hope. And there has to be a number, a greater number, enough number to give you a 95% confidence value, and there's a number that you can calculate to do that.
Yep.
So it's not a trivial matter, but
It's
to
not.
me, it's important to have it to be a random, true, statistically valid survey of the community in general. And I think that's a fair way to go.
Okay.
I also think we'll learn.
How do other
through-
council members feel about
I
that?
think we should go with the statistically valid survey.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll be the contrarian, surprise. I find it oddly prescriptive. And when you think about what we've just been doing with the long-range comprehensive plan, where's the statistically valid survey of the community that you want to impose on all the elements of that? I mean, if this analog, if this is the right methodology, where's the analog in what we're doing that's on a much bigger scale? And yes, some people did talk about surveys, but I don't get it, and it's you know, we haven't even heard from all these people about how they do things, if that's really a right thing. So I get I don't, it's just oddly prescriptive. Interesting hurdle to throw out here.
I don't know if I kind of agree in the sense that I think we're going to learn through this process what we think is the best way. And, you know, the contract's going to dictate where we go.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be some learning when we interview these.
Well, the difference, in my opinion, is that moving forward, a lot of the choices are, we can make choices. It's not like we have to decide whether or not to build a third fire station or something. It's a voluntary, and it's a choice the village has to make. And if the village community has to make a choice, I would like to hear a representative sample. I hate to use the term, a
Correct.
statistically valid sample of the community really believes that, rather than a biased approach.
Well, then,
I think,
then let's just scrap this engagement and go do a survey. I mean,
well, if we could craft a survey that would have all the questions and allow for all the options to be shown, that would be wonderful, but I'm not sure we can do that.
I think there's value in engagement after a survey. And we
Engage
learned
after,
this
yeah.
in a good way and a bad way, for example, in the sidewalks
Sidewalks.
discussions.
Yeah.
You know, we built in our plan a few years ago this notion of doing neighborhood sidewalks based on a statistically valid survey. And then we followed it up with neighborhood meetings that gave us more qualitative information to consider. But both of those engagement processes were very important to our understanding of what our community needs.
Right.
Aggregation of a lot of data sources. So I
It
kind of
just seems-
agreeing with everyone right now. I'd like to do a statistically valid survey along with a lot of aggregated sources of data. I don't think one singular type of data is accurate.
So maybe, and when we're going to talk to the consultants, I would ask them a question to be sure to expand what your definition and how you would frame community engagement. Because community engagement could be meeting at the Fairborn and engaging directly with the public. Community engagement might involve, because they've all talked about surveys. What are the elements of your survey? How do you conduct your survey? How do you know it's a valid survey? So I think I would offer to or suggest that. The other thing is that some of the responses had more than one survey. I would like not to have us confused or getting confused input back from the public about what survey it is, and we'd have to try and put, I don't know, haven't used the library in that group, or those that have used the library. It would be difficult. I think it would
Do
be
one
simpler
survey.
it'd be simpler if we had fewer surveys.
Okay.
What do you mean
I
by
think
fewer
too-
surveys?
Instead of doing two separate surveys, you're saying doing one survey, which
Couple of
that's certainly easy to do. I think that, I think another thing that we should talk with the consultants that you interview about is now we have our portal, Engage Pinehurst. So we can do follow-up surveys that aren't statistically valid, like some of our neighborhoods, you know, to get some additional information on specific points. So you know, I guess I would say I wouldn't recommend that we say we're going to do one survey and that's going to be it.
Yeah.
I think just based on my read and our read of the other proposals that we received, as well as these 4, so there were others, is that a general community survey up front of just is important.
Baseline data.
Just, it's the baseline, it's almost the kicking off point, and then there would be other surveys that would follow further along in the process after you've had focus group meetings and, community charrettes and things like that. There would be additional surveys, so.
I agree. I mean,
I
I
kind of
think we
think of
need
it as a
the
platform, like a
quantitative
springboard.
data, and then we also need qualitative follow-up. I
Right.
mean,
And-
but-
Right.
In our regular village survey, last year, we added some questions about the library. That'll be going out in early September.
It's already out the door. That survey is.
Right. I mean, so it's not out of line with this. Again, I just think that's odd timing to say, oh, and we need this, when we haven't even talked to all these guys.
We haven't, and the only reason I bring it up now is because it may be something you want to speak with them about in the interviews. So I wanted to just
If these
kind of put it out
companies-
there and let you have that discussion.
Companies can't solve this dilemma for all 5 of us. We're not going to hire them.
We have a
How about
dilemma,
that?
and you must solve
Because
it.
I think we all should get our concerns dealt with, and
Well, I
and
think that they probably, I think you're right, Kevin. I think that we'll get.
so that's going to solve that.
We'll have more
Darwinism is
clarity.
going to solve this.
Right, you heard it here, July 23rd.
Okay.
All order.
I just think that's what their job is. They're being paid to
We'll have a little
resolve our
more
issues.
clarity, I think,
Yeah, and I
about
think we're going to learn.
surveying, if we want to do a survey.
Exactly.
Okay,
Is that it?
I think that's it.
Are we good? I've got August 12th and 13th, and I will proceed with notifying.
Thank you,
firms.
Natalie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.
Calendars. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is other business. Do any council members have any other business to bring before the council? Okay, then the,
I thought it was we're in a unique position that Jack went through a process of replacing an empty seat on the board, and I'm not sure we had a certain policy, and I was hoping before Jack left that we could deal with having a well-documented replacement policy on council members. It just seems like a unique opportunity, someone that went through it, we did it, and let's just try to get some certainty in this process. And so it has a timeline, end of Jack's term. I think we
I thought it was
should.
a great process.
Okay.
you won. Jeff, do you have some documentation of how we went through it, and
Yeah.
could you?
Yeah, I mean, there's
Would it
nothing
be a
formal, it's all in
policy?
emails.
I'm just saying, on some work sessions.
It's just a
dedicate some time
policy.
to it. That's all.
It would just be a policy in how
Yeah.
to,
There could be a council policy if you want to adopt one that says this is how you're going to do it in the
It just
future.
would make it, less chaotic and more certain.
Yeah, I mean, I think it worked well.
okay, all right, we will think about doing that. Any other business from council members? Okay, next are comments from attendees. Tom Campbell?
How's this? Loud enough?
I think so.
Okay. When you were discussing the street numbering and how important that was, it takes me back 10 or 15 years when we had, from the PDO, all the requirements, and there are multiple that homeowners need to follow. But somebody back then had a list of things that were very important. I'll take maybe an insignificant to some, but it's not so insignificant, and that's garbage. And I think we had something that dealt with step-by-step things that the new homeowner could receive from the village. Now, I don't know if we have something like that at the front desk anymore or not.
I think we do have a packet. Lauren is shaking her head.
There is a
I think
packet?
we do have a packet for new homeowners.
Okay. Well, how many people come down to look at that packet?
Well,
mean-
it's on our website, too.
Okay. Well, I just noticed the other day, for an example, going by a garbage can, that the top was almost up far enough to see most of the top of the garbage. They weren't in bags. there's just one simple thing that,
Enforcement.
You
they
drove past
didn't-
my house?
Yeah. No,
probably my
no, they're,
house.
enforcement tags, I guess. We learned that Southern Blinds does that more than we do.
any rate, there are a lot of things that are simple, that we don't have to list 500. We could put the top 10 or the top
Right,
20
right.
of things that and Angel could help in that, what she gets as far as things that are wrong in people's neighborhood and so forth. So just wanted to throw that out when you
Okay.
talked about the streets.
Thank you, Tom. Other comments from attendees? Mr. Hoffman?
Madam Mayor, members of the Village Council, ladies and gentlemen, before I begin my remarks this evening, I wish to state unequivocally that they have nothing to do with faith, morals, doctrine, or the Bible. This is strictly a land use issue. The Community Presbyterian Church continues to violate Chapter 9 of the Pinehurst Development Ordinance every Sunday. Illegal parking continues to occur on the old site of the Wee School off Fields Road, and illegal parking creep also occurs on the site of the Denisov property on Everett Road. Meanwhile, the number of Sunday services remain reduced from 2 to 1, which only serves to exacerbate any parking problem which may exist. Although the village manager, all members of the village council, and Mr. Sinclair, the pilot, have been informed repeatedly of these continuing parking violations, all have remained unresponsive, ignoring the fact that these continuing violations have even occurred. It appears that if a violation occurs which involves this church and it is not mentioned, then it has not occurred. This travesty has gone on long enough. Two facts highlight the concerns of our neighborhood which surrounds the church property. Is located in the historic district and is an integral part of Old Town Pinehurst. Fact number one, it is apparent that the village council and staff refused to enforce Chapter 9 of the Pinehurst Development Ordinance when dealing with this church. In particular, Chapter 9.4.1.1E on page 110 of the PDO, which states, and I quote, "All parking areas required under this section shall be completed prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for the use or usage which they serve," unquote. This describes the Wee School site, which this church uses for parking every Sunday and periodically during the week. Fact number two, since the site plans and landscape plans have not been approved by the village, how and why did the tree cutting massacre occur? Who gave the church permission to basically clear cut the CPC properties? Let me reiterate the first fact. The illegal church parking has mainly occurred on the Wee School property off Fields Road. Therefore, I believe that the tree cutting was entirely unnecessary and definitely premature. This lack of enforcement will set a dangerous precedent for future dealings between the village and applicants. As I mentioned previously, the church's improvement project has been shady from the start. The PDO has written prevented them from these renovations for a variety of reasons. So they resorted to a conditional zoning approach, which in effect permits a spot rezoning at an applicant's whim. A majority of the village council members at this time were known, enthusiastic members of the congregation. Rather than recuse themselves, they voted anyway. The result is for all to see. The shadiness is continuing into the review process itself. The church refuses to follow the PDO as required, illegally parking and apparently clear-cutting its property without permission. Who can trust them as regards stormwater management, shared parking with Pinehurst Elementary, the use of pervious pavers to reduce flooding, or even required buffered or landscaping designs? I continue to believe that this spiteful, unnecessary desecration of the Community Presbyterian Church sanctuary properties has breached the agreement reached between the church, the village, and our neighborhood. The situation must not be allowed to continue. The requirements of the PDO must be enforced on all parties equally. No one should be exempt. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr.
Yeah,
Pacifico?
I guess Darren and I can comment on this. I don't mind starting, Darren, and you can fill in the blanks. So I think what we heard were 3 total complaints there. One is this notion of illegal parking in general. There are no requirements in our municipal code or our PDO that would suggest that what's going on over there currently is illegal. The question of a certificate of occupancy is not relevant to the current situation because the church itself has been, if you want to describe it this way, open for business for a very long time. And so it's not a church that's opening and the idea would be that you would have to complete the parking that's required for that new church, if it was a new church or a new business, before we would issue a certificate of occupancy for the owner to occupy that supported use. As I mentioned at the last meeting, when Mr. Hoffman raised these concerns, there is no requirement for a property owner to gain permission to remove trees from personal property currently. Darren?
I think it's within a historic district.
Historic district,
correct. Yeah. I think, I believe, and I'll check, I think a COA was issued at some point in the past on that.
Because it was in accordance with their plan.
Correct. Right. That is correct.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that you had raised is anything that's happening on a site, there's no actual building requirement that actually requires a certificate of occupancy at this point. They're putting in the parking lot. We don't generally issue certificates of occupancy for parking lots. But what I can tell you as part of this process, I think that, I was able to go out and meet Mr. Hoffman at his house, and we walked the site, and so I got a good understanding of his concerns about parking and what's happening in the neighborhood. So I think the biggest thing that we can do at our level, at least at the staff level, is to get CPC moving and getting this permit issued. I know that we've seen some communication from CPC that they would like to actually get going with their building contractor on building work as of July 29th. Now, we are not there yet. We just issued our second set of revisions to CPC, I think either very late on Friday or on Monday, and I think we had 29 comments on that. That matches the comments that we had on the first review. So I think the real issue that we've seen between the first review and the second review is the civil and the landscaper are not on the same page. We are actively trying to get them on the same page. The landscaper was in this afternoon, meeting with Alex to go over all the requirements of the PDO and where they're lacking. So we are trying to get them on the same page. Whatever they're doing with the landscaping has an impact on the civil. So that's why we're trying to get them all, and we put them on notice last week. So they are actively working to try and resolve this issue. So we are working behind the scenes to try and get them to get to a situation where we can actually issue them a permit, and we know that they do want to get a permit to get going, and the sooner we can get them going, the sooner we can address some of the parking concerns in the neighborhood. So we're actively working on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you,
Darren.
Jeff. Mr. Hoffman? Sure.
I did not make up Section 9.4.1.1E of the PDO. Page 110 of the PDO states, as I quote, in other words, you can't park on that space until it is a parking lot.
Could you read that? Could you read that again?
In particular, Chapter 9.4.1.1E, page 110 of the PDO, which states, and I quote, all parking areas required under this section shall be completed prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. That's not my word.
Or, what's the rest of that sentence?
For the use or uses which they serve, unquote.
Right.
In other words, you can't park on the grass.
For the uses that they serve, which is the church. The
We're not-
certificate
we're-
of occupancy for the church.
We're not picking and parsing words. It's very clear. You can't park there until you put in either pervious pavers, blacktop, whatever your parking surface is going to be. It's got to be striped, it has to have the bumpers, and it has to be lanes, egress and ingress.
I agree.
Now, we've had a similar situation, I will say on a smaller scale, with the Catholic Church on Dundee, only they did it correctly. Not this way, correctly. They roped off the area with tape. They went through all the procedures, inspections, and even to the red cockaded woodpecker. All these things were handled. Then the area was graded, it was paved, it was striped, it was marked, still not being parked on, still roped off with the tape, landscaped, and then it was used. That's my example. This is completely opposite. They had it roped off before. After they passed the conditional zoning project, they removed it and started parking right away. I'm not saying you can't take down trees. I have trees on my property. I've had to take one or two down. But you don't take down 60 or 70 trees at a swipe without any kind of permission, I would think. Here we're talking about how many trees are going to come down for Pinehurst Elementary School. Good God, how many came down around the corner? I don't even think the village knows how many. And we still haven't got anything. The trees came down for no reason except to have them down. The area isn't being parked on, It isn't being landscaped, it isn't being, and nothing. It's just a barren mess. And we are in the historic district. We are an integral part of Old Town Pinehurst. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Pacifico?
Thank you for taking the time to listen to me tonight. I'm going to go over a couple of items that I've talked to you in the past, and there's been no action taken on them. And basically, I want to talk to you tonight about two topics. One are the ponds that we built over, or the school has built over by the splash pad, and also the pond that's down along behind the Greens apartment. I think 3 meetings ago I had brought that up, and the only thing that I've seen that's been happening there as far as any progress is the dirt that the village had put on the side of the hill there. Mother Nature has taken care of it and put it down into the stream bed, which is now blocking the streams, and the water comes across the road. I think if you drove up this evening, you drove through the water. I look at that as not only a problem when we have a heavy rain like we had this afternoon, but when it dries up, it's nothing but a mosquito haven. Something's got to be done there quickly. The other topics that I mentioned were the ponds over by the splash pad. The one on the far side of the splash pad, we've had 2 heavy rains, not counting today. And after both rains, it has been destructed. The first one, they put a concrete pipe through the middle of it, but it's not built properly to begin with. My experience as an engineer, I've dealt with building dams and reservoirs in my early career. And all they've done here is, on the far one, is took the existing sand, piled it up, stuck a concrete culvert through it, and when we got the rain, the water just washed along the sides of it and pushed all this dirt down into the woods and blocked up the ditches that we had to control the water to keep it off the paths and take it into our impoundment. Then, I guess 2-3 weeks ago, we had another heavy rain. Well, they fixed it, I should say that. Now, the second rain, it took down the embankment in the back and pushed all that dirt down in. And again, they came back in and brought more of the same sand, I would say. Now, when you build a reservoir, there's different types of material you can use. Now, if you're going with a solid concrete, you can go straight up. If you're going with a clay embankment, you have what they call an angle of repose, which each material has a different angle. Well, they didn't use that on any of the materials that they used when they built this. And like I say, we've had 2 heavy rains, and twice it's washed away. And they've even put sod on the front and the back side of it, and it's to no avail. Now, when you build these are not to impound water and to hold water permanently. They are to slow down the flow of water and control it in an area so that the water will go out and not create a lot of erosion. Well, what they've done now is they built a box, and it comes within a foot of the top of the reservoir. And the water stays in this impoundment until it reaches the top of the box, and then it goes in. Now, that's what you might do on a permanent pond that you want to keep water in. But I call these siltation ponds, and that's the thing, is to collect the silt that we're getting from where they're building the school mobile units, is to collect the water there, let the silt settle down, and then the water go out. So you should always have a pipe at the bottom of it that will always allow water to flow. So like when I drove by tonight, it was not raining, but the water was up there, and all it will do is just to keep filling. While there's not raining, the water should be draining continuously like it normally would, but that's not the case. That thing should be taken down and put up properly. They got to put a clay core in the middle of it, block something across the pipe that they have in there to eliminate that, because I'm sure we do not want that pond to be full of water when the kids are in school, because that is a play area and whatever for them. And besides, I think if tomorrow's a nice day and the kids are out there in the splash pad, you better keep your eye on them because the water's pretty deep there. And then you built a second one on this side of the, I guess it's just by the skating rink. And that has, the only thing I seen there was the old drain that was there. They left that there, and then they just dug a big hole, I don't know, 6 or 8 feet deep, and pushed some dirt around. So that fills up with water, and that was filled up tonight when I came by. And that's totally uncalled for. I think it's a safety hazard, even for the kids that are walking by to go. Now, they got some plastic fence up there now, but when kids are there in school, forget it. And talking about those mobile units, on the first rain that they had, over on the far end by the 211, where they had to fill in material to make it level, they did not compact that material either. And after the first rain, that washed away too. So they drug it back in, and I see now they've put some matting down to hold that in place. Wasn't able to go over there tonight. It was raining too hard to see how much of that is washed away. But I think that maybe we should have an inspector there and let the school know that, hey, if you're going to build something, let's do it right. I mean, 2 out of 2, and the thing is washed away. And I've got some pictures, and I've talked to Mark Wagner, and he showed me some real close-up pictures, because I try to stay off of the property as much as I can. And he's got some real good pictures of the first washout. And I mean, there's no reason for that. We got to have inspection from this side of the house if it's going to be done right. And those mobile units, I would not allow my kid to attend school in there as they're set up now. If you look at the concrete blocks that these things are set on, especially where they hauled the dirt in because it was not compacted, there's not a one of them that is plumb. They're this way, this way, every one of them. Take a look at them sometime. And I think our inspectors should be picking that up. I mean, how many of them are out there? I lost count at 51.
51 mobile units?
Yep, I lost count at that. I'm sure there's some more in there that like I say, I'm not permitted to walk through and count every one of them, but just looking at the alphabet on each one of them, they go A to I, A to G, A to M, and, you know, I lose count. But that's, I would think that we've got to do something with all 3 of those locations and do it quickly. We need some action rather than a reaction. My other item is the trails. The trails that I walk basically are in Rassy Park. They are in horrendous condition. Last June of 2019, I walked a lot of it with 2 of the staff members. And since then, very little has been done, if anything. Now, granted, they did pave along 211 a section, but the drains that come across have totally washed out and are right up against the macadam that they put in. And several other places, they're just not proper. In fact, I've got my camera here tonight with some of the pictures that I've taken within the last 2 or 3 weeks. Culverts are blocked. Now, I will say, sometime within the last week or so, they did go through, and along that where they have the macadam pavement, they did blow out the leaves and open up the ditches. So that they did do. And I did notice today in front of my house, there was somebody out there with a pickup truck shoveling off some gravel in the ditch, but I didn't get a chance to go out and look at it. But, you know, they shovel it off, and then they take the pickup, which has got tires that are spaced, I don't know, 6 feet apart, and you got an 8-foot trail that you're going on, and they're back and forth. They never get to the center to compact it, and it's still in the concave thing. So I don't know. I guess I'd like to show you some of the pictures that I have, but if you want to, after the meeting, I'll stay here and show you some of the photos that I've taken. And I would also ask, I'm available at 7:30 tomorrow morning to walk the trail. And anybody that wants to come with me, please do, and don't bring your golf cart, because some of the places I'm going to take you, first of all, you're not allowed to drive your golf cart there, and secondly, I don't think you could get by in your golf cart. And one of the worst ones is just right outside this building, which I tell my wife, don't walk there. I don't walk there either. But I would like to know if and when some of these items will be taken care of. I mean, Jeff, when we walked that last June, over there on the side of the hill, I mean, the ditch is that deep. And the sand that was on there is all out in the woods, and it's down in the creek now. And what do we do with that? And it's even on the bridges, the sand that are 4 feet out on the bridge. That shouldn't be, because that's just going to rot away. So I guess my question is, I'd like to see some action before somebody gets hurt,
Right,
rather than wait and then we have a reaction, which will take place.
exactly.
So if anybody wants to join me tomorrow morning,
Does it have to be 7:30?
well, we can go at 7 if you wish.
I knew he was going to say that.
I want to go before it gets too hot.
I understand, I understand.
But I'll be in the back and show you some of the photos that I
Okay,
got.
we'll look at the photos, and Jeff, can our engineer look at the ponds over by the
Are
school?
looking at them.
We are looking at
Maybe Jeff's
them?
got an update, but, yeah.
Oh, Jeff Batten.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pacifico.
Relative to the two ponds that the school has installed, there are problems with those ponds, and we are on top of that, what the issues are. We've sent a list to the design team. We've been meeting with them on site. We've been inspecting on site. But these are not things that can be fixed overnight.
Right.
The LKC engineering group that is doing the design is redesigning several things. There are some dewatering devices, as Mr. Pacifico mentioned, that should be installed that have not been but are planned to be, so that the ponds themselves can drain. They did have a couple of blowouts over there, just as he mentioned. They have redesigned the structure in terms of how it will outflow. But they still have work to do. We sent them a list of probably 10 or 12 items yesterday after an additional walkthrough. So, yeah, they've got some work ahead of them still yet to do. At the bottom of the hill, in all of our drainage problems in the area, that one is not a high priority. Ones that are directly impacting private property and roads are ahead of that one. I would expect that one down there at the bottom of the hill probably won't be done until September, because we've got other projects ahead of them that are of greater importance.
Okay, that makes sense.
When does school start? When do those trailers need to
I
be?
think around the 26th or
Of
so,
August?
25th of August, somewhere around there.
About the inspection of the trailers that he's talking about.
Our building inspectors do all of those inspections of the trailers. Yeah. So the foundations, the electrical, the plumbing, all of that is being handled by building inspections out of
It's
the planning
required.
inspection department. So they're still underway as well. They're still in a work in progress.
Okay. All right, thank you, Jeff.
Okay, thanks.
Other comments from attendees? Yes, Bob Coates? I'm sorry, what's his name?
On Webster.
Wagner.
John Webster. You look like somebody named Coates.
Have a beard.
Hey, John.
Sorry to be repetitive, but I come back with a long-term plan. And I see it as evidencing a pro-growth propensity, which I do not comprehend and I certainly don't support. And I ask myself, why as a town do we have to grow in terms of residents and buildings? And I've heard the following arguments in favor of this. One is that we have undeveloped land, and it's going to be developed, and that is fine. Obviously, we have to accommodate it. But at least in my opinion, we don't have to rezone it every time a developer turns up and wants to take something and use it for higher density. The second argument in favor of this is that we have to grow to continue providing services and avoid tax hikes. But Pinehurst is the prime example that this is not true, because this place has grown like mad, and we're increasing the taxes, and all this discussion today on the investment that we have to make in more fire stations, more people, more trucks, etc., is a prime example of what growth means. I brought you an article, which I'll give you at the end, as to on the subject of, it actually reads, the more you grow, the poorer we become. The third argument is that it's our duty to accommodate new residents if they wish to relocate here. Or as one of the plan consultants told me at the Fair Barn, it's not fair to future residents to restrict growth. But I think your foremost duty is to your current residents. And I at least am of the opinion that most of your current residents do not want to see a lot more growth in Pinehurst. In fact, this is a retirement community principally, and so there is a turnover of houses which comes from people dying off. And so if somebody wants to come and live here, you can buy a house of the ones that are existing, which is what I did. There's always many, many houses here for sale. A lot of them are not getting sold. It takes a long time to sell a house for many people, and after heavy discounting. So it's not as if we don't have the houses. Maybe they don't like them, but the houses are here. And the fourth argument I've heard is that if developers can sell what they make, then there is demand, as if we had to meet that demand, or even the wishes of a few developers. And we all know how developers function in general. They go into an area, and they produce a product which is of lesser quality and lesser price. And basically, it's a transfer of value from the current residents to the developer. So as it's a process whereby we go down to the lowest common housing denominator. So I don't think existing residents want to see this process. So I cannot really understand why we want to take a place that everybody likes because it's not an urban center and convert it into that, which is something which is going to decrease the quality of our life and depress property values for many of us. So I ask you to de-emphasize this pro-growth predisposition that I see in the plan. And I think basically talk more to your residents and try to understand if they really want this. I don't think many of us want to see an ETJ that sprouts artificial villages, which are supposedly self-supporting, but I don't think many of us really believe that. If we can't get our own village center to have the sort of commercial vibrance that we would like to have, there's no way that any of these small artificial villages are really going to support the sort of commercial center that would allow people to live there and not get on the roads. So I would just ask you to reconsider what you're precipitating with this plan. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Webster. Other comments from attendees? Yes, Stuart Mills. Thank you.
John, my name is Stuart Mills, and I live at 75 Shaw Road Southwest in the Historic District. I work, as many of you know, as the Executive Director of the Moore County Literacy Council. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Given Tufts Memorial Library. and I've also been a member of our joint working group on the library. But the comments I'd like to make today and the few questions I have relate to my role as being a father of 3 children that we're raising here in Pinehurst and a resident and taxpayer. I'd like to speak just briefly to say that my family and I are very much in favor of us pursuing the creation of a true community library in Pinehurst. The current library, as much as I love it, is too small. It's the same size now as it was when Pinehurst was 1/10 the size. In other words, Pinehurst has grown by 10 times, and the library, the square footage and the number of books hasn't grown at all. I think one of the things we treasure most in this community is our special village life. I think you know what I mean by village life. Village life is very unusual in the United States now. The villages are all gone, but not Pinehurst, and that's one of the things that we think is really special here. A library, I think, could bolster that village life even as we grow, whether intentionally or unintentionally, by becoming really the living room, or even better, the family room of the village of Pinehurst, particularly for the long-term full-year residences like our family. The library would be our principal function, our principal means of supporting the Pinehurst Elementary School. Libraries often do serve that function, providing extra programming that the county itself cannot afford, and those children deserve the best possible education they can get. And I'll tell you the one true way to get property values rising here. This wouldn't be my principal purpose. Helping the children is a principal purpose. But the one great way to get property values rising here is to get that Pinehurst Elementary School having a reputation as being the best elementary school in the state. And we have ignored it. We need to support it. And having a community library would be extremely important in accomplishing that. And as we've heard in the working group sessions, there are many different services that a true community library can provide for people of all generations and all occupations or non-occupations in the village. Too many to list, but we can't do it from the current platform. So I just want to offer those comments and encourage you to continue to pursue exploration of library services, just what you're doing, but to do it as quickly as possible, because I think we're at an inflection point, and if we don't take action fairly soon, I think the moment will be lost, and we'll really have lost something. I have 2 questions. One is about the statistically valid survey. I'd like to know whether we required a statistically valid survey before we built the community center, and I'd like to know whether we did a statistically valid survey for the comprehensive plan. And if we didn't, then why are we doing it for the library and library services, but not for those other things? And then secondly, Jeff, you made some comments, maybe you were misquoted, but they were picked up by the Pilot newspaper, where you said that the cost of a new municipal library building would be the most expensive building that the Village of Pinehurst had ever undertaken. I just don't see how you came to that conclusion. Maybe you're misquoted, but I can't believe, for instance, that the cost of a municipal library would compare, for instance, to this building in today's dollars. I think of this as kind of the Taj Mahal of Village Council. I mean, this is a really nice building.
3 council members lost their seats because they call this the Taj Mahal.
But
We're now outgrowing it.
Well,
Yeah.
but it's a very nice building, and the
It
point
is.
is the information is out there that the library building would be very expensive. I think that prejudices the results of the surveys that we're about to do, because they think that Jeff has reached a conclusion that it would be the most expensive building. If you said that, can we correct it, or could we put out actually data about why you said that, Jeff? Those are my 2 questions. I'm afraid it's sort of poisoned the well a little bit.
I guess I could try to answer both of those questions. On the community center, we didn't do a statistically valid survey in detail to support the community center, but the need was validated by a statistically valid survey. In other words, we tracked a series of questions in our annual community survey over a period of years, which led to us being convinced that I'm trying to recall the specific question most notably, but it had to do with satisfaction with the availability of and quality of indoor recreational facilities. And it was year in and year out, we scored either the worst or near the worst on that question among all questions in our survey. And so that was the genesis of it. With regard to more detailed analysis on whether or not the community supported, for example, basketball courts and pickleball courts and a cooking area, we didn't get to that level of detail. I think we could have done better. And I think your other example about the community, the long-range comprehensive plan, and Judy raised that question earlier, I kind of think we might be in a place where we have a better product had we incorporated some sort of statistically valid surveys, but we didn't. With regard to the quote that you're referencing, I recall making that comment or that series of comments at least once, maybe multiple times. My recollection is that my characterization was something along the lines of this. It's hard to say what the cost is going to be, but it is conceivable to conclude that such a project would be the most costly project that we have taken in a very long time, if not ever, when you include the ongoing operating costs associated with running a facility like that. So it's not just the construction of the facility, it's the ongoing operating costs.
Yeah, I might add on the survey issue is that I think we all would like to have surveys as a part of this analysis. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I think that we need as much data as possible.
Right, and that data is exactly the key word there. So in other words, I would not be afraid of a statistically valid survey providing more data supporting a library. In fact, I would welcome it. So I'm not afraid of doing a survey that is statistically valid. In fact, I think it adds more credibility to the outcome. So I look forward to a survey that is comprehensive and valid enough that we can really hang our hat on it and go forward.
Can I respond to that? The point is not whether the data is useful or not. The point is, why are we requiring a higher hurdle for library services than we are for the community center or for the comprehensive plan? I mean, there may be a perfectly good reason for that, but
I
I
would
don't
like
know
to
what it is.
reply about the comprehensive plan. If you have zoning, you must have a comprehensive plan. Some communities use a zoning map, and they say the zoning map is their comprehensive plan. We do not do that in Pinehurst. We look at every aspect of land use, and it's really difficult to craft any kind of a survey, but it is appropriate to have public input. So that's why I would not, I've been a land use planner as my career. I can't imagine a survey. I mean, input, as much input as you can get from the public, but not a survey. So that's my comment on the comp plan.
And I said tonight that I don't like getting my data from one source. I like getting multiple streams of data to make decisions. So if that's your concern, a singular source of data, we need multiple sources of information. So I don't know if that relieves any of that, but I don't think that we should be using one source of information and data.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments for Stuart? Okay, thank you very much, Stuart. Other comments from attendees? Seeing no hands, I am going to suggest that we adjourn our regular meeting. Do we have a motion?
So move.
Pardon?
So move.
Oh, we have a motion by Judy Davis and a second
Second.
by John Baldry. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. We'll take a 5-minute comfort break.
Or less.
Or less, or less.
Not very much needed.